Red Hawk Media. We're continuing on with our player health system. And when we last left off, we basically got our character to interact with objects and take damage. And the slider goes down. And we animated the slider at different rates so that it doesn't die immediately. And then this is what we're working towards now. Our player goes into the dying animation, and then we can have a screen that pops up on the UI that allows us to try again. Then we can come right back in here, we die again. All right, and you'll notice after a short second or two, he disappears, and then we've got the try again feature. And that's what we're working towards here to kind of wrap up the player health system. Let's go into a few of the basic details. So we talked about the saw. Okay, we talked about the saw actually adding damage. And we put the saw script on there to get it rotating and that. And then in the player health script, we set that up so that the saw would be one of the tags that would actually take our life. I want to show you something really quick, though, so that this can apply to pretty much anything. Let's go to our scripts. And then we're going to go into the player health. And once we're into the player health, we can see this is what we were referring to the last time, where we have the saw item in here. And now you'll see that I've added in also a spikes reference as well. So anything that is tagged spikes will actually cause damage as well, and it'll affect the health bar the same exact way that the saw does. Now, if you were so inclined to add on more obstacles that, say, get in the way, you can go ahead and paste in another if statement here, making sure that you've got both of the curly brackets. Then we come into the spikes area, and let's say that we've got acid that's going to interact with our character. And it's going to take away life at 1 frame per second. And yeah, we've got that going on. So let's go ahead and Command S this, and we go back to our scene. And let's go to the acid. And let's see if I can find that here. Let's grab all of the acid. Let's find one of the tiles of acid that happens to be in the middle. And what we're going to do is we're going to just add that collider on there. All right, so box collider 2D. And we're going to make this a trigger so that it triggers the player health script. Okay, and then we're going to edit that collider. So let's go ahead and come in here. We can see, if I zoom over here. Okay, that was like super zoom. Anyway, we can see the collider, and now we can go ahead and line that up so that it is completely covering the acid here. We can go over and get that to the edge, and now get that all the way down here. And maybe we want him to hit the acid a little bit before he actually has the collision, and then just so that there's no conflicts later with anything else, we've got that collider on there. Now, last step to all this is we've got a collider on here, we've got a trigger, and now what we need to do is we need to actually tag that item as acid. And you can see I don't have an acid tag in here, so I go to my add tag, and this is just kind of a quick refresher from what we did last time. And I go ahead, exact same way that I had it in the script, capital A, and save. And let's go back to where we were before. And I believe we were on one of these, the one with the collider. There we go. And let's go ahead and tag this acid. So now it's going to interact with that acid, and it's going to take some life away. So if I go back to play, and our character comes in here, I'm going to go ahead and jump over our spike, or our saw, drop down here, and you can see that right away it started to take life. And you can see also that it respawned me back up because I've got my respawn box, but see, it took some life. So it's interacting the way that it's supposed to, and then of course he dies. Which brings us up to the next part here. Now we want to start working on the death animation. And it's a very similar process to what we did before. We have to add a few parameters though. And let's start with the animation first and show you how to add that into Animator and create that part. So I'm going to go back to my player, make sure that the player is selected. I'm going to go back to my character sprites, and in your sprites for your character, I'm going to go to the enemy ones, that's what I've been using, and I'm going to look for the dead animation. Okay, now we want to go ahead and select the first one, and of course select the last one, so shift click, We're going to drag these all into the scene. And now we're going to call this animation dead. All right, and save it. Now we don't need the controller, so we can go ahead and delete that right away. Delete, and we don't need this in our scene, so we can delete that as well. So in here, now we've got the animation itself. Let's go back to player. And actually, I'm sorry, we're going to go back to enemy here, and or your player folder, and drag this into the player animation. I'm going to add that in there. And now what I can do is in the animator, I can choose my player first in the hierarchy, switch over to the animator tab, and now we've got several things that are going on here. We want our character to be able to die in the ground layer, so whether he's running, sliding, attacking, the melee, throwing, whatever it may be, we want him to be able to die here, and we want him to be able to die in the air layer as well. So I'm going to start with the ground layer. And I'm going to take that dead animation and I'm going to drag it from my player folder in here. So I'm going to grab that, drag it into, actually let's not drag it into this window here. Let's go to the idle states, which will impact everything on this layer. And let's take our dead animation and drag it in right over here. Now we want him to be able to go from any state right to dead, no matter what. So we're going to create a transition here from any state to dead. Okay, and we've got the dying animation. Now, one thing that I realized, otherwise he's going to loop and do some weird dying over and over where he's going to glitch out. We're going to double click on this right away. We're going to take the loop time off. Okay, and we've got that all set up. And then we have our transition that's happening here. He can go from anything right to dying. Okay, now let's go ahead and add it into the air layer. And same thing, I'm going to get to the player animations, take the dead one and drop it in here just above new state. So the new state is anything can happen basically from the new state while you're in the air. And we're going to create a transition from new state to dead. Same thing, we're going to double click on dead, make sure that the loop time is still off there. So now he can die in either place. And you, of course, with any of the animations, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but you can always adjust the speed of how they happen. One is kind of the default setting, where it's going to be 1 frame per second, but you could take that to half the speed. You could slow it up just by adding some decimals in here, so 0.5, 0.8, whatever it may be. But I just wanted to point that out. If you've got an animation that's going too quickly, you can slow that down. One of the places that I ended up using that is, I noticed with my idle crack, it was happening so quickly that I slowed it down. So I went into the speed and I went to like 0.5, so 0.50. So now when he goes into his idle crack, if we hit play, you're going to see him idling, and then he's going to switch over to idle crack here. All right, and of course this is my old idle crack, but you can see that it slows down her head tilting here quite a bit. The new one that I created with the Z's coming up from the robot, it slows all of that down as well. But that's a good way to kind of control the actual speed of your animation, especially if your character's not moving. It's gonna be something that you can mess with the timing on. Okay, we're gonna get out of here, and now to make this actually functional, we need to know if our character is alive or dead. So we have to add a parameter into this. And the reason we're doing this, just to kind of show you, if we go to our scripts and we open up the player health one again, which you may have open in the background, you'll notice that in here, right away, it calls up the animator. Okay, so it's going directly to the player animator. That's what it's referencing because this script is on your player. And then later, as it's updating, it's always going to be checking whether or not is dead is true. Now, if it's not true, your character is going to continue living and the death animation is not going to happen. But the moment that it switches over to true, then you're going to have the death animation actually play. And this is all tied to your current health, because if your current health is less than or equal to 0, then it cues the is dead to true, and then your character's done for. So to make sense of all this code, let's do this visually now because we don't have to create any of this. Let's go over to our animator and let's add in a parameter. Okay, and we're going to create a new parameter. So I clicked on Animator, clicked on the Parameters tab, and now I'm adding a new bool to the list here. And the new bool is actually going to be is, capital I, and then capital D, dead. Okay, and this corresponds directly with the actual player code that we saw earlier. Okay, so now we've got that parameter in there. So if we go and test this out, actually, let's go ahead and hit play. Okay, and then we go over here and we click the is dead parameter, and you see he's still not dying. Okay, even if we walk our character into the saw blade here, still not queuing up that death animation. He's still standing there. Now the reason for that is that we created a parameter, but we didn't actually create any conditions for the parameter whatsoever, so it's still not really interacting with the code altogether. So if we click on the dead animation here, and then we look at the transition, so it's going from any state to dead, and it's just doing that, but there's no conditions for it to actually follow right now. So what we want is we want to add on our is dead as a condition over here. Okay, and we want to make sure that it's set to true, so that when it goes from any state to dead, it's going to be true, and then that dead animation is going to queue up, because that's directly what we're saying in the code. Okay, now we're going to switch over to the other layer as well. So we did this in the ground layer. Let's go to the air layer. Let's choose dead. Let's click on its transition, and let's add in the condition there as well, where now we've got is dead, and we're setting it to true. So all of the life has to be gone before this gets set to true, and then the dying animation actually starts. So if we go ahead and we go back, let me put on the ground layer here, and we'll go into the idle state so we can see this happen. We'll go to play, and he's idling right now, so we're going to take some damage, and you can see that he's dying. Now, this is what I was talking about, where he's doing this weird glitchy thing where it's playing just a little bit, and it's not going all the way through. Okay, so he's not actually dying all the way through the death animation. So let's go ahead and get out of here. Okay, to fix that glitch where it keeps transitioning, because if you watch this closely here, what we've got is he dies, and then he keeps transitioning, and we can see this in the animator because that transition keeps happening, and it keeps transitioning right back to dead. All the other criteria is set. It's one little setting here that we have to tweak. If we go to that transition, actually, and we put it to settings, and we take off can transition to self, you can see now he actually dies, and it doesn't repeat. It's not a transition that happens over and over. It's a one-time deal. Okay, so we're going to go back and take this out of play mode, double check that that is actually unchecked because we want that to remain so. So we uncheck that, and we'll just test it one more time here, and now he dies. Now, here's the other problem, and this makes me laugh. He is dead already, but he keeps coming into the layer, and he keeps moving, and the controller is still active, and the game should be over at this point, and we need to end him, like permanently, like destroy the game object. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to fix that. Get out of play mode here, and now we're going to go back to our script, and this is our first little bit of scripting that we're actually going to type in here. So we're going to go back to our player health, because our player health is tied directly to our player. Let's go ahead and add in a little script. So we can see that is dead is now true. Okay, and then after that, once that is true, we're going to add in the destroy feature. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually destroy the game object. If I can type, there we go. And let's say that we're going to destroy the game object, but it's not going to happen immediately. Let's say that it's going to actually happen after 5 frames here. Then we'll close that up, put our parentheses at the end, and it fixes our syntax. Let's Command S that to save it, and then we go back, and let's go ahead and play to see how that interacts now with everything that's going on. So he dies. Now 5 seconds, 3, 2, 1. There we go, and he disappears. Now that was kind of a long time to wait. If you didn't want if you didn't want the player seeing more of the level or being able to kind of go through it, you would want that to happen a lot quicker. So we just jump back into that script here, and we take that 5F, which is the timing for all this. Let's go ahead and put it down to like 2F. So after 2 seconds, that's going to happen. Command S this, go back, test it out. All right. And a lot of testing back and forth here to make this work. And he dies, and he's gone. And that was much quicker. Now, in the next part, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to hit the try again button, and it reloads the scene for us. Okay, that's our next up thing to tackle, and that's what we're going to cover in the next tutorial. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Red Hawk Media. Bye.